It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Rishi Sunak takes his new manifesto on the road, but how worried is he about Labour winning a supermajority at the general election?
I think it's perfectly legitimate to say the country doesn't function well when you get majorities the size of Blair's or even bigger.
The Green Party have just launched their manifesto with more money promised for the NHS, paid for in part by wealth taxes. We'll be speaking to them.
Our manifesto is based on investing to mend broken Britain and offer real hope and real change.
Labour are talking about their plan for motorists ahead of tomorrow's manifesto launch. Meanwhile, Ed Davies in deep water again. And a stark warning for politicians about trust.
We are now less trusting, less confident in our system of government than we have been at any point during the last 40 or 50 years.
Joining us today, former Attorney General Conservative Sir Geoffrey Cox, Labour's Dame Margaret Hodge, the General Secretary of the RMT Union, Mick Lynch, and the editor of City AM, Andy Sylvester. This is Politics Live Election 2024. And welcome to viewers on BBC Two, BBC iPlayer and BBC News. Let's start today's programme with this headline in BBC News. UK economy fails to grow during wet April. Yes, GDP figures out today show exactly that. The Office for National Statistics recorded no growth for the month, which was in line broadly with economists' expectations. Now, the sluggishness comes after the UK economy recorded its fastest growth in 2 years from January to March, exiting the recession it fell into in the final half of last year. But my opening question, starting with you, Geoffrey Cox, is Rishi Sunak right to say that the economy has turned a corner?
Oh, yes, I think he is. There's no doubt about that. All of the predictions show that growth is going to continue this year and increase next year. Inflation is down to 2.3. We can look towards, in the next 2 or 3 months, I think, cuts in interest rates. It's definitely turned the corner. There's no doubt about that. This is 1 month of figures.
But it's flat.
Rain stop play is the headline for April.
Could have more of that.
But it was priced in the sense that most economists, as you say, believed that it was going to happen. It still is a long-term prediction of growth. And I think that's turning the corner. Do
you agree? Rishi Sunak's right. The economy's turned a corner using all the metrics that Geoffrey Cox has just outlined.
Absolutely not. I think what we're seeing is the flatlining of the economy that we've had during the 14 years of chaos that we've experienced under the Conservative government. And I think most interesting underneath the figures is that manufacturing and construction are two areas where there's actually been a decline. You know, it's gone in the wrong direction, 1.5% decline there. The reality is that now probably means the Bank of England won't reduce interest rates as quickly as we thought. And the reality of that for ordinary people is we know there are about 1.5 million households who either already or over the coming months will face increased mortgage interest rates and will have a monthly increase in payment of £240.
Well, that's a contradiction, Margaret, because low growth generally means that the bank would reduce interest rates.
No, because
and all of the economists knew that April would be a month when little growth was expected, but the predictions are still the same. 1.5% growth in 2025, getting on for 1% this year. Those predictions remain exactly as they were.
But, Geoffrey, you can hardly say that the growth rates that we've had over the last 14 years and even at the present are the sort of growth rates that we would
want
in the economy.
Well, they're better than Germany. They're better than most of the G7.
No, it depends.
Joint fastest in the G7.
This is abusing statistics because it depends on the way in which you choose.
Since the pandemic.
You choose to take the comparisons with the other economies. Well, it's abuse of the statistics.
Interesting but unsurprising divergence of views there. Is Rishi Sunak right, Andy Sylvester, that the economy is turning a corner?
Shame you brought me in. I was quite enjoying that. I think it's somewhere in between there. Sir Geoffrey's right that rain was a big issue in April. And construction.
It rains every April.
It does.
April showers.
Which is why economists...
It does rain every April. It's called the spring.
Which is why...
I think even economists can predict that.
Putting the weather aside... Is it turning a corner? Let me put this statistic out there, because real household disposable income is lower now than it was in 2019, and that will be the first time since around the 1950s that living standards have gone down over the course of a parliament and not up.
Short answer is it's turning the corner. It's rebounding from a low base, whatever we want to call it, but it's not where you need it to be. It's not where any party would want it to be. It's not where our public services spending plans need to be for them to add up. So as we look at these manifestos, we do have to look for genuinely growth improving measures. What I would say is that though the UK economy is still vulnerable to global shocks, shipping rates are going up again, and we know what happened last time that happened. We are probably slightly underpricing the possibility of a fair wind in the economy over the next 6 months or so. There does seem to be a move that people are finally giving up on the excuse of not investing. We've basically been sitting on our hands for about 8 years, and there comes a point where you do have to put some money in. Whether that's got anything to do with the politics is a different and indeed open question.
Our business confidence is the highest it's been in 5 years.
Well, let me come to Mick on this.
I mean, politicians disown statistics when they don't suit them and claim them when they do. I mean, I'm not blaming you, particularly Geoffrey, but it's the case. But working people don't feel that we've turned a corner, and we certainly don't feel that we know where we're going into more prosperity. People are poorer now than they have been for a very long time relative to where we were 5 or 6 years ago, even under a Tory government.
We have had the pandemic, of course.
We've had the pandemic, but other people have had the pandemic as well, and they've recovered quicker than we have. So we've got a deliberate clampdown on people's wages, on people's bills have gone up through the roof. And, of course, all those prices, people say inflation is going down.
Well, it is.
The prices are already baked in. People are paying record amounts for their everyday needs, including energy, food, children's shoes, whatever it is. People are poorer than they used to be. And there's no feel-good factor amongst the British people at the moment.
Well, let's get some reaction from the Conservative Party's manifesto launch yesterday. Obviously a big deal, manifesto launches. We're covering all of the main parties, the Greens today, Labour's tomorrow. Now, the headline was tax cuts, concrete measures on employee and self-employed national insurance, with the ambition to go even further and abolish it altogether. But did it and will it change the party's fortunes at the polls? Let's talk to the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, who's been getting reaction from Conservative candidates. Did they applaud it?
Not really, no, to be honest, Joe. I mean, I think as a prospectus for another term in government, most Conservatives I spoke to thought it would be fine, good even. But as a political game changer, they mostly found it wanting, particularly Rishi Sunak's decision to focus his proposed tax cuts again on national insurance, proposing a third successive 2p cut in the employee rate of national insurance. One influential Conservative I spoke to said the definition of insanity is trying the same thing twice, so that means this is beyond insanity. And I think if you want a measure of the mood of where Conservatives, both the official campaign and more generally are, just look at the fact that this morning, less than 24 hours after Rishi Sunak unveiled that programme for government, you had Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, one of his most trusted lieutenants, out there arguing about the risks of a Labour, as he put it, supermajority. The Conservatives are now in the position of trying to use the possibility of a large Labour majority to try to ensure that a large Labour majority doesn't happen. That is not a sign of confidence in their campaign.
Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. How big is the danger, Geoffrey Cox, of a Labour supermajority?
Well, if you believe the polls at the moment, we are sleepwalking into a one-party socialist state. I mean, you wouldn't have. I mean, it will be Mick's dream, Mick's utopia. I'm not sure it'd be Margaret's. I mean, the reality is the consequences of that would be horrific, not just for the Conservative Party, for the country, but also for Labour. I think Margaret's mature enough politician to know that an opposition is important. I don't actually believe these things because I don't believe the British people will opt for a one-party socialist state.
What is it you don't believe? You do believe, it seems, along with Grant Shapps, that Labour will win the election.
On the polls, as they are, if they're correct, we would be looking at what Grant is predicting. I don't find that in Devon, where I am. I don't find that people are inclined to opt for a one-party socialist state, Mick's utopian dream. But there's no doubt that if people go to the polls and don't realise that a majority of that kind could be deeply unhealthy democracy. It could happen on the polls today.
So
I don't think it will.
But just to be clear to our viewers, that is an admission, a tacit admission of defeat. It is
it's an admission of where we are at the moment in the polls.
Stemming the blood, as you might say, trying to make
sure.
That's a mischaracterisation. What I'm saying is, on the polls at the moment, if you believe them, then you would be looking at a one-party socialist state. There's no doubt about that.
What do you think? So you're putting all these provisos in. Do you think? Do you agree with Grant Shapps, your colleague?
Well, I agree with him that a one-party socialist state or a massive supermajority would be deeply unhealthy for the country.
I think we've got your line. But are you worried about all this talk of not giving Labour a blank cheque, that it is on the presumption that not only are you going to win, but you're going to win big? How big is the risk to Labour about turnout and voters who have fallen out of love with the Conservatives but haven't yet quite decided if they're going to give their vote to you?
Jo, can I just say, I've been in politics such a long time, and I remember all the times that we lost from 79, 83, 87, 92. So I am extremely cautious. We have a mountain to climb, and I want to work really hard and have been working really hard for every vote. And I think both Mick and I would agree that we want an end to the chaos and the disasters that have been the last 14 years. But let me just say one other thing which really got my goat. That first Blair government was an incredibly successful government. I was part of it. And so we brought in the minimum wage, we gave the devolution to Scotland, we brought in freedom of information, we did a whole load. We invested in the health service, in a way the economy was growing.
That's the point. Tony Blair and those around him had a plan. What Labour doesn't is have any plan at all. It's a vacuum
to be honest, that is just
plan. And we'll see today, but at the moment there's absolutely
socialist state.
There's no plan.
What is it?
There is a plan. There is a plan. And I object to that.
Well, hang on. Do you think there is going to be a Labour supermajority? Do you think this is going to be a landslide moment like 97?
I don't know. I've lived many an election night where we've had the Tories stumbling back into power, and I've been shocked by John Major's victory in, was it 92, 93?
92, yeah.
So I hope there's a Labour majority. We want a Labour government. I hope it picks up the baton and gets braver than what we've seen already. It is a bit bland, and it isn't promising enough, and I hope it uses its majority to good effect to change the country for the better, which people are expecting.
All right, let's talk. Well, hang on a second, because we're going to come on to the Labour manifesto, throwing ahead to tomorrow in just a moment. Let's stick with what we have got, and that's the Conservative manifesto. Was it a game changer?
I don't think it was a game changer, if you judge by the fact that most of the papers didn't put it on the front for one reason. There's some decent ideas in there. National insurance abolition eventually is a sensible move towards a single income tax. I mean,
not a £46 billion black hole, as Labour keeps saying.
Exactly. I think, for better or for worse, it read like a lot of things that people will just about like and not necessarily believe will be delivered. Fundamentally, and this is true in the city as well, there is a bit of a lack of faith right now in the Conservative campaign looking ahead to the future. We've just had X years of chaos. Give us something for why and prove to us, tell us, show us that there is competence now. Show us that that's been left behind. And that, I think, is the challenge over the next 4 weeks. Because although you look at the focus groups and I talk to people in the city and they say, it looks like the Tories are out of ideas, doesn't mean that Labour can't have bad ones between here and the election.
No,
nothing is over yet.
All right, well, hang on. Let's just have a look at the headlines, because some of the substance around tax cuts. The Daily Telegraph, Sunak promises £17 billion in tax cuts. If you roll on to The Guardian, they call it Tories' implausible £17 billion tax giveaway, condemned. And that's because, Geoffrey, those savings that are going to be made, so say the Tories, to pay for these tax cuts, there's scepticism about it. I mean, how deliverable are £18 billion of efficiency savings and clamping down on tax avoidance and £12 billion in that from welfare savings?
In 2019, there were about 20,000 applications a month for health-related benefits for people off work with sickness. In 2023, there are now over 50,000 a month. in 4 years.
So you've made everyone sicker.
Well, the pandemic plainly has had an effect, but it is astonishing that Rachel Reeves said yesterday.
Let's talk about the plausibility of the savings that you say you can make, because that's a lot of savings.
You've asked me to make the case, let me make it. Rachel Reeves said yesterday there wasn't a penny in savings to be found from welfare. That was her statement. Now, we just don't take that view. We think that if we can go back to pre-pandemic levels, getting people into work, driving forward, as was done some years ago, where we got thousands, millions of people back into work with Ian Duncan Smith's reforms, we think we can make those savings over a parliament. Now, there's no reason why we shouldn't do that.
You've asked me because otherwise we'll never get round to it.
$6 billion on tax avoidance. We're currently saving 6.7 a year in tax avoidance.
Well, and Labour want to make savings too. Why don't you believe them?
Because I've looked at the figures, and if you look
so
very I think you've got the brief, not in depth.
I've looked at the figures themselves.
Jeffrey, let me answer. That if we take the welfare savings as a start, there are 7 propositions in your manifesto of how you're going to save the money. 4 of those have already been factored in the budget that we have now. It is completely unrealistic that you will save that money. If you go tax avoidance, which I know a lot about, you've then put 6 billion, but what we have said is you have to invest in staff in HMRC.
But we're doing 6.7 every year.
No, hang on a minute. You're adding a further 6 billion. If you're going to do that, you have to invest up to nearly $1 billion in staff to achieve those, and you haven't got that in. And can I just say Joe, this is one thing. Rachel Reeves made a calculation, because we haven't got real figures, yesterday, that there was probably a £71 billion gap. Now, no doubt Geoffrey will challenge that. But compare that to actually Liz Truss. When Liz Truss did her bonkers budget, where she, cut taxes and raised public expenditure, there was a £42 billion gap. And here we have Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, both of whom called that budget completely chaotic, now coming forward with a much more
because it isn't anything like that budget.
It is that. It's a £71 billion gap.
Now, those figures sound a little bit like the £2,000 that Rishi Sunak said every household is going to pay if Labour get in over 4 years. One thing I did want to mention to you while you're talking about unfunded, uncosted manifestos, what was the thinking behind Keir Starmer comparing the Tory manifesto, uncosted, he said, to Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, on which he stood, on which you stood, and in fact the shadow cabinet. What point was he trying to make there?
Because there's a whole lot. It's like a confetti. I felt it was like a confetti of promises without any clear costings and
like funding. The Jeremy Corbyn one that you stood on and you bet.
Well, like the Jeremy Corbyn one that I sort of stood on.
I mean, it's a
let me just come to me.
These costs, these tax giveaways, as they're called, they're totally biased anyway. This idea that people in self-employment don't pay tax, don't pay national insurance, completely divides them from people on PAYE, the rest of the country, that has to pay its national insurance through its wages every week. Most self-employment in this country is bogus anyway. If we change the rules about self-employment and got people back on the cards, as we used to say, paying their PAYE and paying their national insurance at the proper rate, we would make lots of savings.
I think there are a lot of people in my constituency who find that a strange idea that their self-employment is bogus.
There's loads of
there are plenty of small business people.
You go into construction, you go into all sorts of service industries. There is bogus self-employment where people never have to tender for their own work. You have to tender for your own work, I believe, outside Parliament, so you're not bogus. People in many industries can only get work self-employed, and they should be employees paying the appropriate tax.
Andy?
I'll make a philosophical point about tax cuts. He says, big.
Yes, go for big
calls. Tax cuts don't cost anything. It means the government has less money to spend on other stuff. Right? When we talk about how much a tax cut costs,
it costs the service users.
Well, it means that the government has less money to spend on those services, right? So we're sort of, there's a difference without a distinction, but I think it's an important philosophical one. And we are going to continue to have rows where people are throwing numbers at each other like baseballs with different numbers painted on them that you can always just about make work if you do the figures 100 different ways, unless we have an honest conversation about public services, about the role of the state. It is naive to hope that happens in an election, of course, but these numbers don't add up without massive public sector reform, efficiencies across the piece, a different discussion about how we fund, how we operate the NHS. And instead, We've got a row about 2,000, 3,000, 71 billion. I can
agree
keep
with
quoting these numbers and we're
I
not
completely
getting...
Well,
agree.
and actually both the politicians were nodding away there. So maybe that's the honesty that certainly independent think tanks like the Institute for Fiscal
You
Studies...
should start with
have
what
been
services you want to run and then work out how you're going to pay for them, which nobody does.
Well, you start
if
with
we
the
say we
role of
want to have a
state.
national care system, we want to get rid of queues on the NHS, we want a defence budget that stands up, whatever, and we want to solve housing, you make that promise, which no party is doing, and then you work out how you're going to pay for it, and people will be taxed appropriately on the back of it.
Right. Well, as I say, we were and started this conversation about the Conservatives' manifesto launch. Well, this evening on ITV, the interview that the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak did when he left those D-Day commemorations early last week, it'll be broadcast. We can listen to a little bit of it.
Prime Minister.
Gosh, hello.
Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thanks
you.
No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was
so apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure it was a powerful trip. I mean, so pertinent as well this year, you know, considering what's happened in the Ukraine.
Yeah, which
and,
I haven't seen
you know,
President Biden's remarks, but I think that's kind of the echo of what he said.
Did you get to meet any of the veterans, or were you?
Oh no,
did you just have to do the ceremonial?
Lots over yesterday and
Okay,
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've already spoke to almost everyone that was there, I hope.
Geoffrey, watching that, how do you feel?
Well, he was apologising for being late. I mean, he's accepted that to leave early when the President of the United States was there was a mistake. He's apologised for it. I mean,
But we're still talking about it 7 days on,
Well,
and this will be broadcast as...
Well, I'm not finding that much when I go knocking on doors.
Well, I am finding it.
Well, yeah, but you're not standing. I don't know where you're doing.
I'm helping my colleagues.
But
I'm helping my new colleagues.
I'm going door to door. And let me tell you, they're not raising that. What they're raising in Devon is, are we going to have a continuation of a properly fiscally responsible government that has brought down inflation, that is increasing growth,
where
the economy is turning a corner? They're not talking about...
Can I just say on Rishi, they are doing it on the doorstep. And what is so particularly galling about this is the first commitment he comes out with is that we're all going to, young people are going to do national service. So he's all pro the army, etc., national service. Then he goes, please don't interrupt. Then he goes over to the commemoration events, leaves early.
Well, we know that.
And then he comes back. And what does he do? He apologises for being late, which is another insult to the veterans as well, because he'd rather be with the ITV studio than he would with the veterans.
It's just basic courtesy, isn't it? If you're late, you apologise for being late, don't you?
No, you say...
You don't say to the interviewer who's been waiting for you, look, I'm very sorry I'm late.
Well,
he said he'd been at an incredible event where he met dozens of veterans, and he turned up late and he says, I'm sorry. That's just good manners, isn't it?
No, the good manners would have been to stay with the veterans.
Well,
that's the good manners to the veterans.
And he's made that clear. But let's part. And with good manners, we'll move on to talk about the Labour Party manifesto tomorrow. Mick Lynch, what are your hopes and fears?
Well, I fear they're not going to have enough money because they've stuck themselves with Tory fiscal policy. So I think they've got to be braver on tax. They've got to be braver on public expenditure. We want the undiluted New Deal for workers. We haven't seen that yet.
Undiluted. Have you seen the diluted one?
I haven't seen anything because we're not affiliated.
No, you're not affiliated to the Labour Party. So why should you make those expectations or make those demands?
Because it's really popular. The world of work has changed incredibly over the last 40 years and people aren't getting a square deal. Our disputes in the last 2 years were about having our contracts of employment ripped up, having our terms and conditions taken away. That really chimed with a lot of people. It's why there were a lot of disputes as a result of that. And we want to see that people get a square deal at work. They should expect decent holidays, decent pension, decent sick pay, decent terms and conditions. And we should be allowed to negotiate them. So we want the repeal of the anti-union laws, and we want to be unshackled to get on with our job.
Right, your feet will be held to the fire. Admittedly, the RMT aren't affiliated, but actually the Unite Union refused to endorse the Labour manifesto, saying it doesn't go far enough. Do you and should you change the manifesto to meet the demands of the unions?
Do you know, Joe, I haven't seen the manifesto, as I'm a retiring if you haven't seen it. But let me just make a point that Mick is quite right to keep arguing his case. That's his job. And, you know, it doesn't mean that we agree all the time. He will always want more. But I'm absolutely convinced on the workers' rights issue that it's going to be the most radical reformation of workers' rights that we've seen there's been quite a lot out there. I've seen
but
the
it's been
negotiations.
diluted,
Well, we
Margaret.
don't know quite to the extent to which it's been diluted. I would expect Mick to carry on arguing for more and more. That's his job. I would expect a responsible Labour government to have to balance the interests of the trade unions and the workers with every other sector in society, whether it's business or whatever, and to come out with something which is affordable, doable, and does actually increase workers'
The
rights.
best way to balance it is give the unions back some authority and negotiating power, and we can do that with the employers. We negotiate, but at the moment we're hobbled, and everything's stacked against the trade union and against working people.
Well, let's see where they are doing the reforms. We don't know how far that's going to go, and there is important stuff in there. There's important stuff about 0 hours contracts, which I, hope you'll welcome. There's important stuff about actually flexible working, which I think is really important for women in the workforce. There's important stuff about
what about the strikes? Because you're still in dispute.
We're still in dispute.
You're still in dispute. Are you going to call off strikes if Labour wins the election?
Well, we're hoping to meet ministers. We've got strikes on the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, which is serving in all sorts of areas around the world. We've got railway strikes. Yeah. We want to get in with ministers who want to do a deal, who are ready to negotiate on the issues.
And are you going to meet the demands?
If we get a less hostile environment, we may do that.
I know you, not you, but should Labour meet the demands to resolve the strikes?
We're going to meet and talk, because I think we've had more strikes in the last couple of years than we've ever had since the 1980s. That's not a way to get growth. It's not a way to run the economy. It's not a way to deal with the cost of living standards. And so we've got to get round the table and negotiate. It doesn't mean that we'll concede, but it does mean that we are prepared to negotiate, which I'm afraid the Conservative government ministers have not been prepared to do.
I mean, that will be a result, won't it, if the strikes are resolved?
What we're seeing is a taste of the future if there's a Labour government, aren't we?
What,
beer and sandwiches in
talk.
number 10, the unions calling the shots, Angela Rayner wanting French-style union laws. I mean, what is astonishing here is I've got two distinguished representatives of the Labour movement in one form or another, neither of whom knows a thing, really, about what Keir Starmer plans. Now, there are only two reasons why you don't tell people in detail what you're going to do. One, you haven't got a clue what you're going to do. And two, you know what you're going to do, and you know people won't like it.
Well,
and that is the only reason we're having this submarine opposition campaign, which is not telling Mick Lynch and not even telling Margaret Hodge what they're going to do.
No, I am absolutely sure, Joe, just to say that tomorrow's manifesto will have clear commitments in it that will be costed, that will be funded, and that will, and the great drive that we will have to do, because you have failed to do it, is that drive for growth, which will enable us to fund public services.
The new deal for workers, and that we'll get public ownership of the railways back, rather than the shambles we've had for the last 30 years.
But of course, Keir Starmer did stand on a platform of public ownership of rail, mail and water, and that's not happening.
It's disappointing, and they should be more on the side of public ownership.
I mean, if he can't even keep his promises to the Labour membership, why on earth would he keep his promises to the British people?
Well, that's up to him.
I mean, he made a series of promises with the leadership, as Keir has done throughout his career.
He's made quite a lot of promises.
And he has flip-flopped on one of them. Tell me which promises I personally made. We're talking about your leader.
Well, we have done the manifesto promises that were made in 2019 and not kept, plus the ones that Rishi Sunak has made since.
But these are personal promises.
Yeah, well, hang on.
He told the membership
Can I just pick up on one thing
Party?
on wages and on higher wages and the demands of public sector unions like the RMT? Do you see that as a risk or a good thing, because it will resolve the strikes? I mean, what will it do economically in terms of, if there are, inflation-busting pay rises?
I mean, it would drive up inflation. It would be a small part of driving up inflation. Of course it would. Any pay rise, be it you, me, someone working in a hospital, someone working in a bank, drives up inflation.
Only if the employers pass on that wage rise to their customers. And the employers have been driving up prices without any pay rises over the last 5 years. Very few people have had significant pay rises. In fact, they've lost out on paying real wages, and prices have gone up anyway. There hasn't been a wage price spiral. There's been a price spiral without wages going up at all.
Well, real wages are rising.
Let me just get Andy. They are now. They are now.
But a junior doctor is not earning what they used to earn 5 years ago.
Well, Andy,
it's simple as that.
But real wages are rising.
Only recently.
Jeffrey, your name is not Andy. Andy.
I do not know enough about the internal dynamics of the real wages of people who work in the public sector. I will put that front. If the public sector everybody shush. Public sector cost, and of course it's going to end up costing somebody more. That is how the world works. I think with regard to the Labour manifesto, on the labour rights stuff, you might want undiluted vodka, and some people like undiluted vodka, but more people find it palatable with a bit of sweetness and some Coke or some orange juice. And I think the business community wants to see, particularly on labour rights, that vodka, the sort of sharp reforms of certain bits of it, comes with some sweetness to make it go down, because it can have an impact on jobs, will have an impact on hiring. It does lend itself to less risky hiring, and that hits the problem of getting people back in work. So a bit of sweetness from the manifesto would be welcome.
People are being hired to really poor quality jobs. They're underpaid for the work they do. They're not getting the full value of their labour, which is why the economy is struggling. We can aim to have a higher wage economy where people get fulfilling jobs, get protections for their status.
Well, let's hear a
We're all in favour of that.
Let's
but
hear.
I haven't seen it.
Business owners don't seem to be able to come up with productivity ideas.
Well, Mick, let's see what you think. Let's see what you think of some of the ideas in the Green Party manifesto, because that has been launched. The Green Party of England and Wales. We can show you some pictures, I think, of that launch, because we're going to talk to the co-leader of the Green Party, Adrian Ramsey. It's been called game-changing, your manifesto. Game-changing transformation in health, housing, transport and the green economy. What exactly are you trying to pitch to voters, Adrian?
Good afternoon, Joe. Well, we are highlighting that we have multiple crises to address, that our NHS is severely overstretched. Patients are in corridors, people can't get access to a dentist or GP when they need one. We have a crisis of affordability in housing. People are being priced out of being able to live in their own community. And we have an urgency to tackle the scandal of sewage in our rivers and the climate crisis. And all of these things need investment. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has been clear that the next government will either have to cut public services or increase taxes. And so the Green Party is being honest that we should ask those with the broadest shoulders in society, including the multimillionaires and billionaires, to pay just modestly more in tax, particularly by European standards. We're talking about taking the UK closer to European levels of tax and spending so that we can have closer to European levels of public services that we can all benefit from, and where people aren't finding that they're forking out for private dentists and all the other things that result from not having those public services.
You've talked about investment, and you say the next government should invest an extra £50 billion a year on the NHS, funded, as you say, from those with the broadest shoulders, increasing tax on the top 1% of earners and bringing capital gains tax, the tax on assets, in line with income tax bands because they are lower. How are you going to get that passed?
What we are saying is that we are asking the very richest in society, the multimillionaires and billionaires, to pay a certain percentage according to their wealth. So it would start at 10 million. People with wealth and assets over 10 million would pay 1% on their wealth and assets above 10 million, and that would rise to 2% for people with assets and wealth over £1 billion. So that's one of our clear proposals, and an example of how those with particularly broad shoulders could be asked to pay more in ways that could raise significant amounts of money by the end of this next Parliament to enable us to make these important changes that are needed to defend and restore our NHS, to invest in affordable housing and in the transition to a green economy.
And just to be clear with our viewers, when you say those with the broadest shoulders, you're talking about anyone earning more than £50,270. Now, that's a good salary. Significantly higher than the national average. But imagining a household with £50,000 supporting a family, you're saying they're the ones with the broadest shoulders?
Well, so as you say, anyone earning less than 50,000 will not be affected by our tax proposals. There will be some small changes for those earning a bit over 50,000, where we will ask people to pay the same percentage of their salary on national insurance regardless of their income. At the moment, you pay a smaller percentage on national insurance if you have a higher income. So that would mean £5 a week extra, £5 a week extra for someone on 55,000. And yes, we feel that that's a good investment to ask people for. If those people are then going to benefit from lower energy bills because we've got more renewable energy, we've invested in insulating people's homes to keep their bills down, keep their homes warm. We've got a better, more secure food supply because we've supported our farmers to produce more food locally, and we've got a better health system and dental system where people aren't having to fork out for a private dentist. So everybody will benefit from the changes that we're wanting to invest in.
Stay with us. Andy, first of all, just as a response, I mean, mean, how easy is it to raise those sorts of money, the £50 billion extra for the NHS that's being proposed here, from taxes on the super wealthy, or a wealth tax?
It's a very round number, isn't it? 50 billion quid. One spidey sense does rather trigger. Very difficult. Whenever a wealth tax has been tried across the world, it invariably has failed. Wealth is mobile. Not as mobile as cash, but it's still pretty mobile. And the capital gains stuff that's been talked about there is properly shouty crackers. I mean, entrepreneurship relies...
Why shouldn't assets be taxed in the same way as income?
Well, capital gains, I mean, this is basically a tax on entrepreneurship in many ways, and it would put a sign up on Britain that says closed for business. So if the Green Party want loads of exciting entrepreneurs to come to the UK and build green energy businesses, let's say, I would quite like that. The city would really like it and invest in it. They're not going to come here if there's no reason to run your own business.
Right.
It's no.
Right. Well, Adrian, it's crackers.
Well, there's other forms of incentives we can give to green businesses that the Green Party, of course, would want to do. And if you look at countries that have introduced a wealth tax, like, for example, Spain and Switzerland, that's been well established for some time. And I think people live in this country for a wide range of reasons. And I think people with significant wealth and assets love this country like I do, and have family commitments here, have business commitments here. It's not actually that easy if you've got a successful business to pack up and leave. And the figures we've put together with support from academics and outside organisations are cautious. We've made account for the fact that there may be a small number of people who choose to move as a result of the tax, but most people are not going to do that. That's what the evidence suggests. Yes, your contact there said that 50 billion's a round
number. Yes. Sorry, go on. Finish your thought, Adrian.
He said it's a He said it's a round number, and I have rounded it for the purpose of talking to you, Joe. But if you look at the specific figures in our manifesto, it is broken down into exactly what we would spend that on across all aspects of both health and social care, how we would increase that over the course of the Parliament as we grow the capacity of the workforce. So these are serious figures that show how you can have a plan over the course of the next 5 years to both defend and restore the NHS and social care.
I think I've been fairly clear. I'm sceptical on the numbers, and I think it would be a tremendously bad thing for Britain's business reputation around the world and for investment into UK businesses, which is what we started the programme by talking about the desperate need for. So I don't think it's a good idea. One thing I did just hear there was the word social care, which is one of the other things that hasn't really been talked about in this election, which we probably should be talking about.
Right, and we have tried to talk about it. I mean, making comparisons, hang on, Adrian, making comparisons with other European countries when you mention introduction of wealth taxes. We've just had the European elections, of course, and actually the European Greens in Germany, Austria, France, Belgium, Portugal, Austria and Finland, I think I mentioned Austria twice there, saw a reduction in the number of Green MEPs, their seats and their share of the vote went down. That is not a vote of confidence in green policies, is it?
Well, I'm standing here to represent the Green Party of England and Wales, where over the last 5 elections we've seen an increase in our number of elected Greens fivefold right across England and Wales, all corners of the country, winning seats from Labour and from the Conservatives, from older voters and younger voters in rural and urban areas. And we're standing candidates right across the country this time with a fantastic chance, particularly in those seats where we're really campaigning very hard on the ground, where people are used to having Green councillors representing them and know that by having a Green MP representing them, they'll have that voice in Parliament that will push the next government to be bolder, to push it beyond its baby steps for the change that we need.
Well, Adrian, I'm going to bring in some of our other guests. Mick Lynch, is there anything you've heard there that you don't like? Or is the Green Party, in that perspective, something you could get behind?
Well, we think the Green Party have got some interesting ideas. I think Labour should be braver on their tax approach. There should be more of a debate about progressive tax right across the parties. I don't follow this line that every business is going to be discouraged. There's a lot of accumulated wealth that should be taxed, not wealth that's being generated. It's just accumulated with the wrong people. There are some mega wealthy people in this country who should pay more tax. And as a percentage, they pay less tax than ordinary people. So that should be worked out. I like their public transport policy, and I just wish Labour would look at some of these ideas and be more bold in their approach.
Would you vote Green? Might you vote Green?
I'll be voting to get the government out, so I'll be voting Labour.
You should be braver. And that's a transformative, you may not like it, but it's a transformative proposition, Margaret.
Well, I was actually going to take us back a bit, Joe. Will you allow me to do this? Because I can't even start. Well, I can't really take the Green Party at all seriously as long as they don't tackle the anti-Semitism in the Green Party, which I had to tackle within the Labour Party. And I want to put to Adrian 3 cases that there's Kate Sibley.
Well, let's not talk about any live cases. Can I just interrupt? Just because
no, this isn't a live case. There aren't.
Right, but let me just put a general question, because there are investigations ongoing, aren't there, Adrian, into some of the newly elected Green councillors. What's happening and how many people are we talking about?
So the Green Party takes any form of racism and in particular anti-Semitism very seriously, and we have a process like other parties have where if there are questions raised around things candidates have said or have liked on social media, that those are properly investigated, separate from the party's leadership. And we're standing 574 candidates in this general election. There were a number where there were questions raised and they were investigated. As a result of that, there were 4 of those candidates who were originally selected who are no longer standing, and where we've selected alternative candidates in their place. Well, but that's 4 out of 574, where we're standing a record number right across the country. And of course, like any party,
there have been problems, and clearly then a number of them are not standing. I'd rather not go into specific cases, Margaret, because I don't have the detail.
Well, let me just say this. There are 3 candidates that I've got here who are still down as candidates for your party, Adrian. One of them has said that Israel was aware of the Hamas plan on the 7th of 10th, and IDF soldiers actively participating in the killing of their own civilians in order not to have to trade hostages. That was posted on Facebook. Another liked a post which said Israel must be eliminated. And another one claimed that Jeffrey Epstein ran a blackmail operation for Israel.
All right.
And these are really serious allegations, and I cannot even start to engage in your economic policy and your public expenditure commitments and how you're going to fund them until you sort out anti-Semitism. It's infected your party in the same ways that it infected Labour, and you ought to deal with it.
Adrian?
Well, all of those quotes that you highlighted there, Margaret, are completely unacceptable things for anyone to say. I'm not going to get into which individuals or where they may or may not be in the governance process, and indeed that's separate of our party leadership anyway. But I'm very clear, and the Green Party as a whole is very clear, that we condemned in the strongest possible terms the awful attacks of Hamas onto Israel on the 7th of October. We want to see the hostages released unconditionally, and we've been calling for a ceasefire on both sides throughout, so that the terrible atrocities that Israel and Gaza have faced come to an end. And we also see the terrible images on the news every day, the tens of thousands of people who've lost their lives, their aid's not getting through in Gaza, and the International Criminal Court has been clear that there have been appalling actions on both sides, and we need to all be very careful how we express ourselves on this, given that the vulnerability that so many people in our Jewish and Muslim communities are facing at this really difficult time.
Thank you. Adrian Ramsey, thank you very much. Just briefly, because I want to talk about trust in politics. We haven't got long. Do you accept that you have lost significant support and you've had Labour councillors quit over the issue of Israel-Gaza?
I think that it's been an incredibly difficult issue. You know, I've stayed very, very close to the Muslim MPs all the way through in trying to keep that going. I think we'll see what happens in the end. I mean, I have been out on the doorstep, Joe, and I've been in constituencies with large Muslim populations. In the end, it's a bit like Mick. Everybody wants rid of this government and they will vote Labour. There's a choice between two and they will vote Labour to come back. We'll see whether it has an impact on 1 or 2 constituencies, but I think there are people, you know, I think are looking at the bigger picture.
I'm going to talk about trust in politics very briefly, and Geoffrey, and get your response, because it's been carried out by the elections expert Sir John Curtis, saying that trust and confidence from the public in politics and in politicians is at its lowest ebb. That's after 14 years of Conservatives being in power. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me that over the last 20 or 30 years we've seen a radical drop. We saw a major drop after the Blair government. The turnout was 30. The Blair government got its majorities with 36%. Well, it did in 2001. That's exactly what they got. That's exactly what they got. Well, have a look at the figures.
The question of today.
So what I'm saying is I think there's been a trend in this direction, We've had extraordinary events like Brexit, we've had the pandemic, and I think the question is, what do we do about it? I don't think it's blamable on any one party. I think that's naive, and if I may say so, just opportunistic.
So what do you
I think all parties share, and civic institutions generally share responsibility for restoring trust in our democratic system.
But one of the main issues,
the moment we start blaming it on one party or another, you simply reduce it.
It is actually the disillusionment over Brexit amongst Leave voters that is one of the striking parts of this survey that's been carried out. What do you say about that? You haven't delivered Brexit in the way people wanted.
Well, we've left the European Union. That's what the British people voted for in 2016. We've left it. Now, there may or may not be some reasonable disagreement over what has happened in Northern Ireland, but we've definitely left the European Union. That verdict had to be delivered. In 2019, the Labour Party, and particularly Keir Starmer, were manoeuvring to block it and aiming for a second referendum.
We'll have to carry on the conversation without you. Bye-bye.